Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Wednesday, November 14th, 2018. I am Dave Biddle. Very happy to be joined by the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. Bax, the college football playoff rankings were released last night. No change. Buckeyes stay at number 10 despite beating the number 18 team according to the committee. Last week, Michigan State by 20 points at Spartan Stadium. Just Bax, your reaction to the Buckeyes staying at number 10?
Well, the committee has a hard-on for the SEC. How does that sound? They've been pretty transparent in the BS that's involved with the way that they've treated teams from the Southeast, with the finagling in of ACC teams to make Clemson look good. The fact that LSU has 2 losses but is somehow ahead of Washington State, who shouldn't have their only loss. Let's not forget they literally had that game stolen from them by bad Pac-12 officiating that was later found out to potentially have corruption involved in a targeting call that would have likely given Washington State their only loss into a victory against USC. The fact that the 2-loss LSU team is ahead of an OSU team that just went on the road and beat a top 20 team according to the CFP just this most recent week here, while LSU barely beat Arkansas, who was god-awful, is a joke. Florida being ranked where they are is a joke. Kentucky is the biggest fraud in the top 25 and the most likely to not be ranked at the end of the year of all the ranked teams right now. And somehow they're only 17th despite Tennessee beating them. I have a lot of issues with these rankings by this committee. Not necessarily the top couple, but it seems very clear to me there's been a pretty heavy bias towards teams from the Southeast this year. That said, if you're Ohio State, you have a simple job, and that you need to beat that school up north, because the committee seems to have a pretty good opinion of them. And if you're OSU and you have a strong game and you win that kind of game, it kind of undermines all the questions that people have had about you the whole year. And so the good news is that that's potentially the best win on the board for anybody except for Georgia, who could, of course, beat Alabama in the SEC championship. But, you know, if you're OSU, you take care of business against Maryland, and then you need to beat that school up north, period. So, I don't know, though. I have a feeling the committee this year is finding any excuse they can to keep Ohio State out. It just seems to be the vibe I've had after last year, where they put Alabama in throughout no actual performance on the field and everything to do with the fact that they just flat out thought Alabama was better. I think this committee is all about eye test, and I put this on Twitter earlier this week. I see no logical point for teams to be scheduling difficult out-of-conference games at this point. If you're Ohio State, even the fact that you play 9 Big Ten games is a real problem because the SEC only plays 8. And so look at the 2 games that Ohio State lost in conference the last 2 years. They lost to Iowa at Iowa, Big Ten West opponent that would likely have not been on the schedule before they went to 9 teams. And then they lost at Purdue, Big Ten West opponent, who again likely would have been on the schedule had they not gone to 9 conference games. So we're going to let Alabama play a bunch of joker-ass teams and play 8 conference games and have 2 real games a year. And I'm not saying that they're really good, but they're going to waltz through their schedule every year while Ohio State's going out and playing Texas and Oregon and Notre Dame and all these other big schools. If you're OSU, just play Akron, Bowling Green, and Kent State every year until the Big Ten you want to go back to 8 conference games, and then the committee's eye test will be, wow, Ohio State's drilling everyone. It's getting out of hand, because I remember when the playoffs started, it was supposed to be all about who played the best schedule and had the best wins, and it's not that anymore whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Ohio State finishes 12-1, I still think there's a good chance they're going to get in. I know it might not look like it right now to a lot of people, but I think if Ohio State's 12-1, as you mentioned, with the win over Michigan, who the committee loves, Big Ten champion they like, despite what they say, I do think they like conference champions. With Alabama, you throw all the rules out the window. Last year, Ohio State, it came down, as you mentioned, to Ohio State and Alabama. This year's not going to come down to it. Let's say Ohio State finishes 12-1, likely Alabama's going to win out. I think they're going to beat Georgia in the SEC championship game, and then it's going to come down to, first of all, I don't think this is going to happen because there's always chaos. But let's say it comes down to 12-1 Ohio State, 12-1 Big Ten, or 12-1 Big 12 champ, either Oklahoma or West Virginia, and then 12-1 Washington State. Again, very unlikely that's going to happen. But if it does, clearly to me Ohio State's going to go over Washington State. and LSU is going to be out of the picture by then. 10-2 LSU is going to be out of the picture, so Ohio State will jump them as well. So then it comes down to Ohio State against the Big 12 champ and this is assuming Notre Dame beats Syracuse and wins out, and then beats USC, which is no sure thing, especially Syracuse. But if, no chaos happens at all, they're sitting there. I think the only scenario Ohio State does not get in at 12-1 is Oklahoma. Oklahoma would have 2 wins in a row over West Virginia. I could see them taking Oklahoma because even though name brand shouldn't matter if you're an average college football fan, it does, and that helps Ohio State out. If you're an Ohio State fan, you love that. I think Ohio State still has a really good chance of getting in at 12-1. Just unpack a lot of that for me, Bax.
Well, first of all, I think the Big 12 is about to have one of their most classic self-inflicted errors ever. The last couple of years, they've been whining and complaining. Oh no, we need a Big 12 championship game. We need a Big 12 championship game. We have to have a Big 12 championship game. We get left out because we don't have the Big 12 championship game. And then instead of going into divisions, they've decided to just put their 2 best teams on the field. Well, the problem for them is in all likelihood their 2 best teams are going to be West Virginia and Oklahoma, who are going to play each other the last day of the year. And then if that's the case, whoever wins that game immediately gets a rematch the next week. Immediately the next week, they're going to play each other again. And if that happens, then the end result is, I bet you the other team wins. It would be the funniest thing ever if they both won a game in a 2-week period against each other and knocked each other out of the Big Ten, or out of the national championship picture. That just seems like the classic Big 12 thing to happen. Now, that said, if you look at Oklahoma, I'm more concerned about West Virginia, honestly, going ahead of Ohio State than I am Oklahoma. A 12-1 West Virginia has a great offense, a very reasonable-looking loss, a decent schedule, right? Oklahoma, on the other hand, their defense is you think our defense is bad? Their defense is horrifying. I mean, it is literally 30 places worse than any other top 25 team in the playoffs right now. So, that's certainly a thought to consider here is that the committee looks at teams and their weaknesses. Oklahoma's defense may be the weakest unit of any team on either side of the ball in the entire top 25. So I think Ohio State, let's say it comes down to this. Let's say Alabama wins, which we all expect. That knocks Georgia out. LSU's not in the picture. Clemson's, of course, going to win out because the ACC is garbage. And let's say, just for argument's sake, Notre Dame wins out. So then you have Ohio State beating Michigan, finishing 12-1, which, by the way, if Northwestern doesn't completely crap the bed the next 2 weeks, they're going to be ranked in the top 20 when they play in the Big Ten championship game since they're at 22 this week already. You're going to have them. You're going to have Washington State, whose only win that the rest of the year that's going to be remotely impressive is the Apple Cup, if they could get that, because the Pac-12 South is god-awful. There's a realistic chance the Pac-12 South champ is 7-5. And then on top of that, you have the Big 12 team. So I think there's a legitimate chance that the Big Ten champion, being Ohio State at that point, is going to get the 4 seed. But the other question is that something we're really sure about? I don't know if there's a scenario for OSU that's worse than Georgia beating Alabama, because I think come hell or high water, the committee is going to put Alabama in the playoff here, period. The only way they don't get in is if somehow they lose to Auburn and Georgia in a row, and I just don't see that happening.
All right, switching gears, the latest Brett McMurphy, air quotes needed, quote-unquote, report is about Trayvon Grimes' departure from Ohio State last year, 5-star wide receiver. I mean, we knew all about this. We knew what was going on. He could have just called us if he wanted to know the real story. Instead, he put out whatever bullshit he put out. So Brett McMurphy's report yesterday, Matt Baxendell, go.
Brett McMurphy's an asshole. How's that sound? And should be sued. Let's be real blunt here. He's accusing Zach Smith of dropping an N-bomb, and for all the things we've heard levied against Zach Smith, racist is not one of them. Let me just ask people a very blunt question. Anybody with a brain that functions more than Brett McMurphy's, which is literally every human being on the planet, including Forrest Gump, they have a room of African-American young men in the wide receiver room. If your coach is dropping N-bombs, you think any of them are going to stay in that room? Are you kidding me? You have a coaching staff with multiple African-American coaches on it. You think any of them are going to put up with that? And finally, Urban Meyer, for all the things that he's been accused of being soft on discipline with players or whatever the hell he was accused of this summer, I'm still not even sure what he was supposed to have done. Racism has never been brought up. This is a desperation pathetic attempt to sully Urban's name. It's Brett McMurphy's last pissant attempt to get Urban Meyer fired from the Ohio State job, an attempt that he so desperately wanted this summer and failed miserably at when it found out that his reports were utter trash. What he's essentially saying here is that Ohio State is condoning racism and Trevon Grimes' mother is faking her cancer, which is one of the most horrifying things I can imagine somebody coming up with. The only answer is that stadium where Brett McMurphy works should be utterly embarrassed and has no journalistic integrity. Brett McMurphy, as we already all know, is a complete and utter hack. And really what he's done here is completely undermine any of the stuff he tried reporting this summer that all the national reporters seem to think was good reporting. Nobody on the planet thinks this is good reporting except Brett McMurphy. And it's exposing him as the utter partisan fraud that he is. So really this does Ohio State a benefit. And by the way, one other thing here that's worth mentioning. I find it highly coincidental that this is dropped right after Zach Smith goes on Twitter and says to Tom Herman that he's not going to cover for him anymore with his apparent serial cheating, which if that's true, that would explain why Michelle Herman was so angry when she called me drunk a couple of years ago. But I digress. Truth of the matter is, it's way too quote-unquote coincidental that, of course, this comes out right after Zach Smith goes on Twitter and calls out McMurphy and Tom Herman for all of their shenanigans. Brett McMurphy is Tom Herman's court jester. You know exactly where this is coming from. This is nothing more than a flat-out pathetic hit job. And like Urban Meyer said in the coaches' teleconference yesterday, I fervently hope Ohio State goes out and sues Brett McMurphy for slander because you know what, at this point, he is literally the epitome of fake news. I don't like to use that term, but Brett McMurphy, fake news, should be ashamed of himself. And at this point, I can't remember having more there's national reporters we've not liked. Like I remember Trev Alberts crapping on Ohio State because he thought they weren't good at football, right? Remember back Miami's going to beat them by 4 touchdowns, and we all hated Trev Alberts, ha ha ha. Well, that was a football thought. That's his opinion on the quality of a football team. Brett McMurphy is actively trying to ruin Urban Meyer's life. It is pathetic. I hope Ohio State sues him for all he's worth and puts Stadium out of business.
And you touched on it. I mean, this doesn't make Tom Herman look good at all. I mean, and more could come out. But even if more doesn't come out and he survives his job and whatever, I mean, he better start winning more in future seasons. His job down there in Austin, Texas. But this makes Tom Herman look pretty bad, Bax.
Well, Tom Herman looks like an utter scuzzbag. And there was a lot of rumoring that went around that nobody really could substantiate. So unlike Brett McMurphy, it was never really reported on. Hell, we sat on Michelle Herman calling and yelling at me for a couple years, right? And God knows I wanted to talk about it. It would have been hilarious. But we decided it wasn't newsworthy because it wasn't really worth knowing until this whole Brett McMurphy BS-ery came out this past summer. Tom Herman right now looks like a juvenile, just complete – he looks like that kid in high school that thinks he's super awesome that everybody secretly hates, but he's just good enough at whatever he's doing that nobody really completely calls him on it. You know, and if Zach Smith is any proof, this is going a little off the rails here because Brett McMurphy is the real issue here, but if Zach Smith is any proof of Tom Herman cheating on his wife at Asian massage parlors or with Iowa State recruiting girls, Tom Herman better hope he keeps winning football games at the University of Texas because they have enough money to get rid of him in a heartbeat if the people at Texas don't feel good about him morally leading their team. And I can tell you right now, if I'm somebody at Texas with a lot of money, you know the guys who tried buying Nick Saban like 5 years ago from Alabama and almost did it? Tom Herman better really watch his ass. That's the only way I can put it right now.
Great conversation. We could go on and on, but we try and keep the
Bucknuts Morning 15.
BM5 at least. Yeah, we try and keep the BM15 a little bit condensed. But yeah, before we get you out of here, tell the listeners about the relatively new Bucknuts Postgame Live. We've been doing the last couple of weeks. You're the host of it, our postgame show on Bucknuts. Tell the listeners, for the uninitiated, tell the listeners what they need to know about Bucknuts Postgame Live, Bax.
So what we decided to do here is that we had a Sunday show that we used to take part with a radio station out in Dayton, and that relationship came to an end recently, and we wanted to make sure that our Bucknuts people had a podcast or a show to listen to following the games every weekend. Well, after much discussion, we decided, hey, we have a lot of content on Sunday that's written. Obviously, you write the What We Learned article right after the game. Steve or Pat Murphy have the article covering the game. Sometimes both of them have stuff covering the game. And then on Sundays, you have Bill Green's column. You have Dwayne Long's column. And, of course, I was writing the Bucket of Bullets. We had a ton of written content. And so we decided, hey, we've got a ton of great content for the Bucknuts subscribers to read. Let's make sure we don't let that podcast content go away. So what we've been doing now is after every Buckeye game, we're going to have a program where I'm literally live reading comments, feedback, giving my opinion on the game, et cetera, et cetera. And this is something that people can literally be interactive with and take part in. We wanted this to be Bucknuts postgame show, not Backstocks About Sports postgame show. So we've done this every week where we go ahead and do the show live. It's about an hour of me talking about the game, interacting with a bunch of people involved live. And then, of course, we have it available to be listening over on Sundays. So we're going to do this for the rest of the season. I'm certainly not done writing the bucket of bullets forever. I'm sure I'll be back writing it before you know it because there's a long off season where there are no games. But for now, we decided we want to make sure we kept our radio content up and gave everybody the opportunity to keep the content that we know they love. So Bucknuts Postgame Live is going to continue. This week, if the game's at noon, it'll probably be a 7 o'clock or so postgame show, and we're going to keep it from there.
So make sure you tune in to Bucknuts Postgame Live, my friends. Great stuff from the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. Appreciate it, Bax, and thanks to all the listeners out there for tuning into the show. I appreciate that as well. Hope everyone has a great day. Let's try the Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.